In this video training, we discuss the objectives of communication, and we'll start with why do we have to communicate? Well, it's very simple. To attract our targeted audience. Secondly, we want to the reason why we communicate is to position our brand as the brand of choice when it comes to what the consumers need. We want to develop a connection with our targeted audience. That's the whole basis of communication. It is to connect. When you connect, you increase your chances of the consumer making a decision that is in line with what you are recommending as a management solution to them. And so we are communicating in order to develop a connection between the practice and the targeted audience. And so very, very important component that you need to understand about communicating is that your target audience is broken down into different components. You've got different generation types, you've got different market segments, and you've got the different characteristics that define the patient, the customer, and the client. So when you're communicating, always remember that at any given point in time, you are only communicating with a particular group and not everyone. A lot of the time, optometric practices don't realize that when they're doing promotional activities or communicating via their marketing initiatives, they are isolating a wide range of the targeted audience simply because how they've structured the communication tactics speaks only to a small percentage or a small group of the bigger picture or bigger community that they need to be targeting. So how you communicate with a baby boomer who is a high incoming earner is going to be different from how you're communicating with a first-time visitor to a practice who has never had any visual problems prior to this moment, who is a millennial and is a low incoming earner. You see what I mean? It's completely different. And so don't have all this amazing marketing activities whereby you are constantly communicating with your targeted audience, not realizing that, but wait a minute, I'm actually only limiting my communication to a small population. And then I get surprised then, why do the rest of the people that we are offering services and products to not connecting with our brands? That's because you have not communicated with them. So make sure that when you're communicating, you are connecting with each and every single type of individual that your practice has the products and the solutions and the services for. Don't just have a one-size-fits-all approach. The other reason why we communicate is we want to promote our business offering to the public. We want people to know that this is what we offer, this is what we are setting ourselves apart as. And it brings us to the last component as to why. We want to establish our value proposition. So we want to put out there. That's why we communicate, so that people then know for all my visual related needs, that practice comes to mind. For all my eye care related needs, that practice has got the necessary solutions, services, and products that I need. That's why we communicate. So it's very, very important that as a practice, long before you get onto social media, long before you have a website, long before you do various marketing initiatives, you understand why it is that you're communicating. Then, secondly, you then have to understand how you should be communicating. Firstly, how you should be communicating is that with authenticity, openly, and genuineness. That's very, very important, that whatever that you do, it's genuine, it's real, it's authentic. And understand that you've got social media, you've got digital media, and you've got print media. So how you communicate on all those different types of mediums is going to be completely different. Also understand how you communicate should be broken down in terms of the communication mechanisms that people prefer. Others prefer audio, others prefer written mechanisms, whereas others prefer visual communication styles. And so very, very important that when you are communicating on social media platforms, you have a breakdown of all three. When you're communicating on various digital media platforms, you are communicating with all three. Sometimes you don't realize that there's a population, a large population of your target audience who are millennials or Generation Z, who are on YouTube quite a lot. But you busy on social media, they have migrated from just having social media to having YouTube channels. And that's where they can connect with your brand more. Others are into podcasts, and your practice having a podcast channel where you are communicating your offering on podcast channels could speak to a large population that prefer audio. Others prefer blogs, articles that can help them connect with your brand. And so have a good enough spread of how you communicate and the mechanism in which you are using to communicate on social, digital, and print media. That's very, very important. In a manner, you have to communicate in a manner that speaks directly to the audience specific needs, expectations, and of course requirements. And so understand, what does the patient need? What does the customer need? What does the client need? What does the baby boomer need? What does the Generation X need? What does the millennial need? What does the silent generation need? Once you understand those needs, what does the high income earning individual need, the middle income earning individual need, and the low income earning individual need? Once you understand those needs, you then understand that, oh, this person has the following requirements, and this is what they're expecting from an optometric practice. How do we exceed expectations in that individual, to that group? How do we make sure that we catering to the needs of these different individuals? What products do we have that speak to addressing this need? What solutions do we have that speak to solving this need? And it's going to make how you communicate much more effectively. And so a very easy way to knowing how to communicate is finding out from your patients. When they're filling in patient information forms, how do they prefer you to communicate with them? Ask them. That should be one of the most important questions that you're asking patients, customers, clients, every single time. Let them fill in, and it must be something that you are following up on. That, oh, okay, out of the 10 patients that we saw today, someone needs to be keeping track of this is how people are preferring us to be communicating with. And you're indicating on your system, on the computer, how that person prefers you communicating with them. And you're indicating it that, so that when you are having to send any form of communication pertaining to your company, products, service that you've rendered, products that they need to be coming and collecting, any advertising that you want to be doing, you are not having this generalized approach. Yes, that is still relevant for broad-based marketing, right? But that's falling in line with traditional marketing methods. Right now, going forward in building and establishing the practice and the brand and yourself as an individual in a practice, if you know that, wait a minute, there are certain people that I know prefer us to communicate with them in this manner, then you communicate with them in that particular manner, and it makes the process much, much easier. Then it's, what should you be communicating? Well, regarding your brand, you need to be communicating your story. And remember, we said on the previous training that you have to communicate through storytelling. That's very, very important. So your brand, you're communicating your brand through a story. You're communicating your brand identity. You're communicating your message. Then that's what you're communicating. Next, it's what you should be communicating is your value proposition. What sets you apart? What makes your practice different? What makes your offering different from any other practice in your territory? Then you're communicating your solution offering. That's very important, that you don't start with your solution offering. It's just part of what you should be communicating. A lot of the times, optometric practices are busy communicating the solution offering only, not communicating their value proposition, let alone communicating their brand through story, brand identity, and brand messaging. So story is only the fourth part of what you're communicating. The last part of what you're communicating is why the consumer needs your products. That's the last part that we have written here. Why the consumer needs your products. So that's what you should be communicating. Then lastly, it's when you should be communicating. regularly and often. Determine what works best for the different platforms for you to use. That's very, very important that you understand what works best, and because what happens on Instagram will be different from what happens on Facebook, will be different from what happens on YouTube, on your podcast channel, on your website, on LinkedIn, and so forth. And so you need to determine what will work best in terms of when you should be communicating on those different platforms. And understand that it takes time before you can establish various patterns, norms, behaviors, and consumer experiences that exist on those different communication platforms that you are supposed to be communicating on. And so understand that this series on objectives of communication starts with why you're communicating, followed by how you should be communicating, what you should be communicating, and lastly, when you should be communicating. And that is something that you need to sit down as an entire optometric practice and discuss it amongst yourselves in terms of in terms of the objectives of communication, and it will make what you're communicating much easier. That's basically how it works.